Welcome to Check In with Jason Lauritsen, where we explore how to create human, connected workplaces that employees love and that fuel organizational success. Each week, I invite someone who is leading the way in this work to join me for a conversation to both educate and inspire us. Today's guest is Joe Dicianno. Joe is the Director of Talent Management and Organizational Development at UPMC and a professor of HR People Analytics at the University of Pittsburgh. He completed his PhD in Instructional Leadership and Management at Robert Morris University with a focus on generational theory and employee engagement in the workplace. Joe and his team have been awarded the Brandon Hall Group Award Gold Medal for Best Advance in Employee Engagement, an Inspiring Workplaces Award Gold Medal for Inspiring Culture, and a 2024 Inspiring Workplaces Award because of their work with My Voice, UPMC's organizational employee listening and employee engagement strategy. Joe's a busy guy. He's also the author of the book, A Busy Leader's Guide to Caring Leadership. So he is as passionate about this work as I am. Joe, it is good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, great to see you again as well, Jason.
So let's get to know you a little bit better before we dive into the work. I'm excited to talk about caring leadership with you today. But before we do that, can you share a little bit about your work and kind of what you do and who you do it for, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a Director of Talent Management, Organizational Development at UPMC. I've been here for coming up on 12 years. I first started as a shared resource between learning and development and talent management to bring some analytical eyes to our learning and talent management platform, and quickly followed my passion for leadership into the talent management space. And we grew a department out of nothing and continue to take on different programs and resources and roll them out across the system based on all of our business needs. Prior to that, I worked and led teams in the construction industry, the fine dining industry, and then spent some time in the military as well, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about as we move forward.
So for those that aren't in your neck of the woods, can you tell me a little bit about UPMC? Because I know I didn't, when I first saw that, I didn't realize how big this organization was and what you all do. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're headquartered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. UPMC is a world-renowned healthcare provider and insurer. We're the largest academic medical center in the country, and we have an international footprint as well. Domestically across Pennsylvania, Maryland, and New York, we have over 40 hospitals, over 800 doctors' offices, around 100,000 employees in that footprint, which makes up around 9,000 leaders that I get to interact with in my role at UPMC. So a broad scale, a lot of life-changing medicine happening across this organization that is also very diverse, with a corporate function, with an insurance arm, with a UPMC enterprises arm at the forefront of technology, and a variety of other business units that make up this vast organization.
It's pretty awesome and pretty big organization. So thanks for sharing that. So I am curious. I always, for those that listen know, I am curious about people's backstories and kind of how they find their way into this work, because it's always interesting. So how did you get into find your way in kind of the space of HR and talent management?
Yeah, I feel like everybody usually starts this by saying it was not the normal way into HR, where I went and got a bachelor's degree in HR and then worked in HR and worked my way up in HR. I was first in school for criminal justice at Virginia Commonwealth University, and that was something that I wanted to do, as well as work in the construction industry, which really was what my father did, put a hammer in my hands from the time I could swing it. So always have a special respect and understanding of the construction industry, which I did work in as well. When the housing market went out in 2008, 2009, I had to shift focus to pay my bills. I went into the fine dining industry, where I worked at a lobster and steakhouse, worked my way up there eventually to managing the restaurant itself, as well as being the wine director of that restaurant. And then had my quarter life crisis, where I always wanted to join the military. I always wanted to see how I would stand up against the test that the military would offer. At the time, I didn't realize how much leadership was a central part of what I was doing and what I was really following, and that leadership would become my true passion. But sometime in that military journey, I became obsessed with leadership. I started reading more. I found my love for books later in life during that time, and then just couldn't put them down. So once I got out of the military, I had a business degree with an HR double major as well. I moved to Pittsburgh. I found a great home at UPMC and really just followed the red thread of leadership to the talent management space, where I have really never looked back. Got my MBA and now my PhD in this space, and continue to collect as many badges, read as many books, and have as many experiences as I can, because it really fuels all of my passions. It fuels leadership. It fuels my ability to help others. It fuels my natural inclination to understand systems and people and psychology and philosophy, and, just try to make the world a better place. I'm a bit of a dreamer in that way, and this job allows me to do that.
Well, I think there's a lot of things in there. It seems obvious why you and I have connected or clicked when we have talked, because of shared passion, certainly in there. I think a couple of things about, you said that the normal path to HR, like the more of these conversations I have, I'm becoming convinced that the abnormal path to HR is actually going to undergrad and studying HR, because at least to HR leadership or talent management, like the leadership level, it seems like everybody came from someplace other than HR academically. Yeah. And the military background is fascinating. We have not actually talked about that in the past, but I find that from I have lots of friends that have military background. My son was in the Marine Corps, and it seems like if you are interested in leadership, it's such a great place to have a very pure experience of what leadership, like you get good leadership and bad leadership, like you see the impact of it almost immediately, and you can feel it immediately because of the consistency of the system. So I did not know that. That makes a ton of sense now. The context of that is super helpful. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to transition now into kind of getting your take as a student of leadership, as someone I know who thinks about this all the time, observes, reads, studies, measures. You and your team are on the front lines of what I think of as kind of probably one of the most challenging environments to lead effectively. Healthcare, I think, is just the complexity, the design of the system, the stakes, all of the things make it, I think, really, really high stakes and difficult. So I'm curious what you've seen particularly over the last few years. What are you observing about how leadership is evolving, or maybe how the demands on leaders are forcing kind of a new way of thinking or approaching leadership?
Yeah, I think that the challenges are vast. They are complex. The three things that come to mind for me, I don't think necessarily are healthcare specific, although they may exist in other industries, but they're a little more complex in the healthcare world just because of the nature of the business. And to your point, the stakes, we're talking about people's lives. We're talking about patients that are coming into our hospitals that are experiencing, to them, might be one of the most vulnerable days of their entire life, or the worst days of their entire life. And our team of life-changing healthcare providers provide a quality experience for them that makes them better, but also is, enjoyable to some degree because of the stakes that are at play. So the first thing that I think is challenging for us is the managers. As I mentioned, we have around 9,000, nearly 10,000 managers, directors, leaders across the system, middle management, however you want to categorize it. These individuals have been through the ringer. We went through a global pandemic that really flipped Maslow's hierarchy of needs on its head. Safety and security became the forefront of everything that we do for nearly 18 months, if not longer. And we all banded together through that process. It was difficult. But now the managers are kind of on the back end of that, the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, many years later. as soon as we were recovering, the Great Resignation was going on in this country, and there was, record number of people flipping jobs or leaving the healthcare sector altogether. So now we have this compressed manager group that has been dealing with a lot of challenges and have been using the rally call with their teams for many years now, and it's when you hear the rally call once, you answer that call. When you hear it twice, you continue to answer it. But the more that you hear that rallying call, the more that it becomes exhausting to be able to keep up with that and just to be able to bite down and give it that extra effort that is needed to be successful. The second piece I would say is healthcare volatility. Right now, in particular, is greater in this industry than in many other industries, although it's great in all industries. The level of uncertainty right now with the socio-political environment as it relates to healthcare is complex. It makes it difficult to plan for the future. It makes it difficult to keep up with the pace of change. Also, while you have burned out managers, while you have folks that are answering the 50th rally call in a row. And then the third piece, I would say, impacts all industries, but healthcare in particular because of compassion fatigue. Healthcare is a very emotional job day to day. My job itself is not as emotional as nurses and physicians and transporters and environmental services folks, the real heroes on the front lines of healthcare that are fighting every day in a world that is also experiencing a loneliness epidemic. I pulled some stats recently this morning just looking at, in 2018, 54% of adults in this country said that they feel generally pretty lonely. In 2020, that was 61%. Every year since then, it continues to increase. 58% of Americans last year felt that no one in their life knows them well. So you're asking more from people or while giving them less. There's a lot of volatility and the speed of change is fast. And, human nature is to band together whenever times are difficult to get through them, right? So you're having to do all of this. Wow, loneliness is at an all-time high. Connection is at an all-time low. And this concept of banding together to answer all of these rally calls time and time again is a huge challenge to resiliency. And it creates a huge problem, one that we're working to address and will continue to work to address in all industries, in all hospital systems. I'm sure, this would resonate with them.
Well, and there's a lot. I mean, again, like I said, high degree of difficulty. And I think you're right. I think those challenges aren't not all of those challenges are not necessarily unique. I think the challenges you described with what the managers have been facing, similar challenges, but I think just the volume is turned up really loud in healthcare because of the nature of the work and all of that. The volatility certainly is happening everywhere. I'm not sure the compassion fatigue is a evenly distributed one because of the nature of the work, but it certainly means that there's a lot of it. It's a more challenging environment, which calls for probably some different ways of leading. And I know you have a point of view on this, to the point you wrote an entire book about this that's anchored on caring leadership. And I'm curious, what was it for you that prompted you to, I guess, invest in writing an entire book about this topic? What was it you were seeing, or what was it that triggered you to do that?
Yeah, so probably around the time that I was reflecting back on my military experience, all through my restaurant and military experience, I had these journals that I would keep, and I would write down my leader is Jason, and Jason did this, and that's a quality of a good leader, and Jason did that, and that's a quality of a bad leader. And I kind of had this pros and cons list that was ongoing of leadership, but really it came after I was able to fully feel recovered and, in hindsight, look back at my military experience, which in the most unlikely of places, I found that individuals cared deeply for me and the mission when I was in the military. I also started to see the word caring reverberate through My Voice survey data, which is our employee engagement, culture, employee experience survey. So I started to see it in healthcare as well. So as I reflect back on my military experience and fully capture the essence of care that I was shown from, the toughest people that I ever met. So the last place you expect to find caring leadership, there it was. These people that I was able to train with loved the grind of the work, and that made me love the grind of the work that much more. So whenever we think about the grind of the work and the training and the tireless preparation for war, we looked out for each other like I had never seen before. We cheered each other on, with the exception of a few selfish people along the way. We yelled at each other during trainings. We would get physical at times, but outside of that, we cared for each other. And the only reason why we were doing those things is because we cared for each other. We trained as if every single moment was going to be the exact moment that we were executing on a mission. So it needed to be perfect. We needed to be perfect. And we had that standard of perfection that we held each other to and we held ourselves to. So that rigor was necessary in training for war in the way that it's not necessary in training for other roles. But the power of caring is still the same. In between training, we'd help each other refresh, recharge, heal. We spend time cleaning our gear, cleaning our weapons, having hours of conversations, getting to know each other, getting to know how each other worked, getting to know the histories, meet people from different backgrounds, from different places that have different experiences. And oftentimes people think high-performing teams are these clean, perfect, things that work in this perfect rhythm. And yes, that is true when we execute, when we're on a high-performing team. But there's a lot of messiness that you have to go through before that. As humans, we're messy. And as long as we're able to work through the mess together with other humans and keep the humanness, then we're able to create a high-performing team based on that through the foundation of care. And then in the chaos of work, right, when it came time to shed that training and actually execute in real time, we overly communicated. We trained harder than we had to so that we were prepared. And because we had been through so much of that mess together, our bonds created that perfect symphony that made up a high-performing team. And it was really built on the foundation of care, and those conversations that we had and building that connection, to where you feel like brothers. And you hear a lot of veterans kind of explain that as we became brothers and sisters in this journey. And we're here fighting for the person next to us, not for any other reason. You'll hear things like that from veterans at times. And really, that's just getting at that care and connection, which is the last place I expected to find it. But in hindsight, that's what got me through. I went through some special forces training and selection and other things where, you have a lot of self-doubt and you have a lot of thoughts in your head. Can I make this? Can I do it? Can I make it to the next step? But it's those caring leadership experiences that helped guide me and push me through that and get through some of the toughest physical things that I ever had to go through in my life.
I love that explanation, because I do think that's one of the, at least I find that all the time, that there's a misinterpretation, or we're adding a lot of baggage to care or kindness, as if it's somehow soft, or it's somehow not, it's not a component of elevating people to higher levels of performance or inviting them up, as if you can't sort of hold someone accountable or be intense with someone and care deeply at the same time. I find that I get caught in that all the time. It's like, no, I'm not going to let you off the hook because I love you. I'm going to hold you to account and expect more of you because I love you, right? Or because I care about you. I think that's a really interesting thing. And the fact that you found that in the military, I am sure that you have seen this play out in the healthcare world as well, too, because in a very probably different way, but I'm sure the same thing. I suspect that you have a pretty clear way of sort of codifying what caring leadership is or what that means. So why don't we do that? And then I want to kind of get into the how. So how do you define caring leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I define it as, the non-business dreamer answer would be that all people add value and are important enough to be cared for and about. The business answer is that when you can harness this skill and really use the power of care, people will be better versions of themselves for themselves. And that is such an incredibly powerful thing. Lots of leaders focus on making people better for their own gain, but people can feel intention, and that intention can certainly also have a dramatic impact on people's lives. There's lots of leadership models and theories out there, and there's some worse approaches to leadership that I would say even work. You could lead with coercion and fear and quid pro quo. That works temporarily. It doesn't last. Caring leadership is something that's sustainable, something that lasts, something that can be done at scale. And, really this came to mind when I read Simon Sinek's book called Infinite Game that talks about, what type of a game are you playing? Are you playing the game that is finite, that has an end? If you want to lead with fear, that's a way that you can lead, but that has a definite end. Eventually people won't fear you, or eventually people will get tired of that. But caring leadership builds lasting bonds that are infinite. And those are deep bonds, the kind of bonds to make people more resilient and keep making themselves better every day because they want to, because they have now set up the standards that you have for yourself, that you have for them, and really seen their potential and how they can reach that. And they're going there because they want to go there, not because you're telling them to go there, not because you're forcing them to go there. And I've seen it magnify people's talent and potential over time, to the point where even they could leave my team or leave UPMC or not even be on my team, just be someone that I have talked to and interact with and talk about the power of caring leadership. And then, it opens up new windows and new avenues of thought for them and how they interact with people.
I love that. The caring leadership is helping people become a better version of themselves for themselves. That is really, really powerful. So that leads me to okay, how? What does that look like? And so I'm curious if I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, I get this, but in actual practice, what does this look like in terms of how I'm interacting with my people or how I'm choosing to lead?
Yeah, I think at its most basic level, it is saying that leadership is a relationship. Leadership is not a transaction, and a relationship requires constant attention and need and care. And if you're able to build this into your day-to-day leadership practice and really get to know your people and really get to build a relationship with them over time, then you're able to see the power of caring leadership. So in my own leadership experience, I spend time getting to know my team on a deeper level, getting to know what makes them tick and asking the tough questions and having the tough conversations about them as a person, not just them as a person that's a means to an ends to me, that can run projects for me, that can do transactions for me, but how do they actually think? How do they tick? How do they view the world? And how can we talk about things that are not just work all the time, that make them feel seen in a world where a lot of people don't feel seen, that make them feel like they actually matter in a world where they otherwise might not feel like they matter. There's how many people in this country? There's 100,000 people within this organization, and the challenge is to make people not just feel like a number, to make them feel like a human. And you do that in every interaction, every day. And if you can hardwire that behavior, it doesn't take more time. So it becomes scalable. That's just my own leadership. In my past experiences, I have a lot of different examples. Whenever I first went to college and I was in the construction industry, I had an individual that was trying to go out on his own with his own construction industry. He saw me working as a laborer on a job that he was working on. And then he said, I see something in this individual who, at the time I was in college, I was young, I didn't really know. I thought I knew everything about the world, as everyone does at that age, but you really know nothing. and he would, take me out to dinner and talk to me about life and talk to me about my experiences and really get to know me. And our relationship wasn't transactional. Our relationship became one of care. That never crossed any boundaries from an HR perspective. It was still maintained a very professional work environment, but he knew me, he saw me, and that made me want to work harder for him. That made me want to be better and, a better person and a better man, and then I'm in that experience in the construction industry. And that caused me in hindsight to look at my father and say, why was he so successful as a superintendent or a contractor in that industry, and the way that he went about things was different. He got to know his subcontractors as people, not just as people that he was saying, go to this house and install this roof and do this and do that. He knew their families, he knew things about them, and he viewed leadership as a relationship. And, they loved him for that. Yep. There were many subcontractors that would work for him and only for him as a result of that, and even as his son, I knew those subcontractors. Yeah. And they knew me, so that just shows the power of care, at scale that kind of passed from my father to me. And that in hindsight, I'm able to look back and see that.
So if we zoom forward now, right, you've been observing this for a long time. Mm-hmm. I am sure that being the quant that you are and the measurement, the analytics guy, that you've seen evidence of this impact at scale. And so I'm curious if you have any particular examples or situations that you've seen in terms of what you've observed through measurement or what you've observed through the work you do in an organization the size of the one you're in, where you're like, okay, we know caring leadership works because here's an example of how we're seeing it have impact.
Absolutely. So, I think quantitatively, I see it in our My Voice survey, which you mentioned. That's our award-winning culture employee experience survey. When I first took that over, it asked a lot of questions that were very global, in nature. One of which was an organizational cares question. This organization cares about you as a person. And, that was a lower scoring question, but that got me to think about the concept of care and at scale. And since then, we've made it much more micro while also keeping the components of macro. So we ask statements like, my supervisor cares about me as a person. My team members care about me as a person. And that's measuring care at many different levels within our culture. And whenever you cross-analyze that with the measures that matter in organizations, like employee engagement, like attrition index, or even a predictive index on attrition, organizational commitment, like all of those type of things that really help people stay within an organization, they help them bring their best selves to organization. If I were to take positive, neutral, negative sentiment on my supervisor cares about me as a person and cross-analyze it by all those other measures, it's night and day. And if I can just move the needle a little bit on our culture and where care sits within our culture as a supervisor, as a team, as an organization, and how well we actually convey care on a personal level to our teams and to our individual people, then engagement skyrockets. Then so many other measures skyrocket as well. Even things like, the work that we do is continuously improved upon. My supervisor talks to me about career development. If you just move the needle on one of the cares items, then it moves the needle on so much more. And the beauty of that is it's down at the supervisor level. There's nowhere to hide. If you're my supervisor and I don't feel you care about me and I answer neutral on that or negative on that, that's you. It can be tied to a person. It feels from a manager's perspective like they can do something about it, and they can, and it makes it more actionable as well.
So is it an oversimplification then, if I'm going to try to just kind of interpret what you have said, is that if you're at that supervisor level and you want to impact kind of the the outcomes that we care about, right? That we want people to want to stick around, to do their best work, be committed, all of those things, being all in their work. Is it truly as simple as, I think what I heard you say earlier is it's about, as a supervisor, it's just expressing interest in the human being, getting to know them, which I think probably implies, and I think this is probably the complexity I would guess, is I need to actually spend some time getting to know people. And I know that in healthcare, at least from what I have heard in talking with peers of yours in the healthcare world, that is the number one challenge is, you might have people managing or in theory managing 30 people on a given floor or whatever. How in the world do you do that? So I'm just curious, like, as you're navigating that, as you're coaching and teaching and training leaders to do that in that kind of environment, what does that look like? How have you operationalized care for them? What tools are you giving them for how to do this in that kind of crazy environment where they are time stretched?
Yeah, I think when you look at it as an elephant, it seems large, right? And, another book plug here with Atomic Habits by James Clear, which I highly recommend, is, break it down into your daily habits. What are you doing? Where are you spending your time? How are you showing up and showing up fully in moments that you can create a human experience for someone that they can feel cared for? Are you running around doing rounding in the hospital and one-on-ones, with the checklist piece of paper that says, like reading off a script? How are you today, Jason? Are you having real conversations with people? Are you remembering information about people? So if you say, hey, your son was in the Marines, now I can use that as a crutch to build a conversation. Are you calling, it can be the most basic things as well, like that, like calling people by their names. It's very basic habits that you can build over time that just make people feel seen and heard, that eventually make them feel like you care about them enough. And then it can manifest itself in a variety of other things. It could be, my manager doesn't care about me because they never spend any time with me. They never meet with me on one-on-ones. They never talk to me about career development. So as we dove deep into this care concept quantitatively, we start to measure the other behaviors and say, like, how do our employees feel about my manager has regular career conversations with me? My manager cares about my well-being, And then you say, well, these are the key components that make people feel cared about. Did I walk away from the conversation with Jason feeling like he was important, or did I walk away feeling like I was important? And a lot of leaders will miss that, where they will run around flaunting importance, for lack of a better way to explain it, whenever they're missing the point, which is, you as a leader have a duty and a responsibility to your team. And if you can find a way to harness the power of care through all of these other micro behaviors, then you're going to see the impact of it. Your business metrics are going to go up. Your turnover is going to go down, and everything is going to start to fall into place. And that's where a high performing team starts to be formed, because whenever you feel that someone cares about you, you naturally trust them. Yeah. And I also found that care, although it's more ambiguous and kind of more fluffy than things like trust, as an example, you don't trust anybody that you don't feel cares about you as a person. So it's actually a prerequisite to many of the other things that other leadership tactics and theories and tools will say are important. You look at Amy Edmondson and psychological safety, which is built on the crutch of trust. Well, how do you get people to trust you? You show them that you care about them. You show them that they're human. They're not just a number. You be fully present for them. And it's in all of your little micro actions that you can build up care. So that's why I said Atomic Habits, because if you just go out tomorrow and say, oh, I'm going to start doing all of these things and having real one-on-ones and talk to people in depth about what makes them tick, and not just reading from a script, and showing them that my time shows them what I care about, then you're going to fail. because that's just too much to come in and rechange your schedule overnight. Start with little habits. Start with making one-on-ones a regular occurrence with your team on a weekly, or if you have a larger span of control, monthly basis. That's more than realistic, even with 30 people. Use that time to actually learn about them and what ticks. Don't just sit down and go through your list of business items and then send them on their way. You have to show them through little micro actions that they actually matter, that they're human. There's this experiment that happened that has 36 questions to build connection ad infinitum, and they did the experiment, and it's been replicated multiple times. And the very first question in that experiment is if you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would you have dinner with? So I look at this experiment that was used to build connection and actually created love connection and lifelong friends as part of the experiment. And I use that to talk to my team. I'll put one of those questions in our one-on-one. I just did this the other day in a skip level meeting, and I said, we're going to start doing this in our skip levels. I'm going to ask one or two of these questions. If you could have dinner with anyone, who would it be? And the questions are designed to open up Pandora's box. And through that experience, I learned more than just who they want to have dinner with. I learned about some of their interests. I learned about what shows they watch. I learned about parts of history that they find intriguing, and then I just take note of those things and I build upon them. And then when I interact with them, they feel like a human. They walk away feeling like they're important, not walk away feeling like Joe is important.
Right. No, it's, as you're talking, the thing that came up, and it's so interesting to me because, so much of, I think so many times we're reaching for solutions and we always think there should be something new. We're looking for the new thing. And as you're talking, I'm like, I think Dale Carnegie said something about this a long, long time ago, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People is still probably a book that should be required reading for anybody that wants to manage people. And it's boy, is it an old book, but the fundamentals are all there. Remember people's name, just the basic. It's just interesting how it always comes back to the fundamentals. But I think the piece that is really important, at least as I'm listening to you, is the commitment to care. I think that's the piece that we have to, when we're promoting people, when we are putting people in positions of leadership, is if you don't care about people, or if you're not predisposed towards caring about and for other people, you should not be in this job. Because this job is a job that requires that. And I think that's the part that if you care, then the work of it isn't that hard. It's pretty rewarding. It's hard for the people who don't care or don't want to care, right? Because they made it transactional. So I think this is a really good, hopeful message and a good reminder to make sure that we're not just teaching people how to do this, but we're putting the right people in where they're predisposed to do it.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. So My last question for you today is a question I always ask because I find it intriguing. This is kind of one of my 36 questions, I guess, but it's about the future. And I'm always I like to, that's kind of how I keep myself energized, is hopeful visions of the future. And so I'm wondering, when you think about work, and I'm talking big capital W work, 5 years from now in the future, what is one thing you hope will be different about work in 5 years than it is today?
Yeah, the typical HR answer for this question is HR get a seat at the table, or HR, getting out of transactional space and into true partnership. I think those are all valid answers. I think for me, it's that we inherently remember the things that make us human, and we continue to ensure that humanity exists in the workplace, especially in a world where AI is, on the precipice of having a massive impact on the workplace, if not already. As that continues to advance, that's going to push less human into the workplace, but at the end of the day, we're creatures of habit. We have things that make us tick as humans. We have things that we need in society and connection. And, I think reminders that we are human, whether that's in your organizational values, whether that's in your organization's mission, or whether that's part of your culture and how you tell leaders they should be leading, is by reminding ourselves that we're constantly human in a world that is constantly pushing us away from humanity. That's the dreamer in me that also is very much like you, to maintain hope and to continually drive towards that hope.
Yep.
But I'll always be a dreamer in that way because it keeps me looking forward. It keeps me thinking about the possibilities and solving problems indefinitely.
Well, and the good news is you have your hands on the wheel, right? So you can have an impact, at least for 100,000 of those humans, what the experience might look and feel like. So that gives me hope for those people, and that sets the example for others. So I appreciate you being here to share that inspiration, your work, how you're approaching that with us. It's a good model to follow. I love all of the things that you are saying. So I really appreciate your work, Joe. I appreciate you sharing it. So let's land this plane with a one-word checkout. So I'm going to ask you, in one word, how are you feeling right now as we wrap up our conversation?
I am feeling energized. It's nice to know that there are other dreamers out there that, feel similarly, that this work continues to have a platform to evolve. And, the best part about caring leadership is it doesn't matter what anybody else is doing. It only matters what you're doing. Whether, you have the excuse that, my boss isn't being a caring leader. Okay, well, that doesn't mean that you can't be a caring leader. Anybody can do it. It's completely free. And as long as you hardwire the behaviors, it doesn't take more time to do it.
My one word is hopeful. And I think I used that one I probably overused that at the end of these conversations, but it is in talking with people like you that are inside of organizations doing the hard work, that have the heart and the vision and the determination that you do to see a future like this made possible. And so I'm feeling very hopeful for the workplace and the future of the workplace. I also think, and I think you and I share this, I think the workplace may be our greatest hope to actually heal society, to heal kind of broader issues. If we can help people feel less lonely, more connected, more seen in the workplace, I think that spills over and has impact with people at home and in their communities. So the work you're doing is righteous work, my friend, and I appreciate that you're doing it. And I hope you continue to do it as big and as loud and as aggressively as you can. So Joe, thanks for being here, man. This is a great conversation. Thanks for sharing your work. Where can people find the book? Where's the best place to find the book, or where do you prefer they find the book? A Busy Leader's Guide for Caring Leadership is the title. Where should they go?
Correct. Right now, my publishing deal ended, so I republished it on self-publishing in as cheap of a format as I could get it so that it is more accessible to folks. It's on Amazon right now, or other places that you could potentially search for resale or other things. But Amazon, A Busy Leader's Guide to Caring Leadership. Also, if you want to connect with me, I can be found on LinkedIn, where I'm regularly interacting with posts about leadership, interacting with leadership groups on there, and liking different leadership things that I see.
Awesome. Well, we will include a link to where to find the book and a link for how to connect with you on LinkedIn in the show notes to make that easy for folks that want to reach out and connect. Joe, thanks again for being here, and thank you for listening. I hope that you feel hopeful and inspired by Joe's stories and his perspective and his advice on caring leadership. I think the message I'm taking away that I love is that anybody can do this. It's free. It's just a choice. You make a choice and you follow through with the behaviors to really see people and make sure they feel that you care about them. So what an opportunity. I hope you take that back to make an impact. And please remember, reach out and check in with those who matter most to you. It might be the most important thing you can do today. Until next time.